Okay, well, why don't we get going? And thank you all for rejoining us. We're going to dive into the affordable housing panel. That was my mistake as we went to break. The constitutional debate will be right after lunch. So we're going to stick to the agenda, dive into the affordable housing panel. Fascinating data that Catherine presented this morning on public opinion on affordable housing on public lands. So this is a great opportunity to really dig much more into that issue, talk about various perspectives on public housing or on affordable housing on public lands. And we're going to talk a little bit about some case studies from Colorado and Nevada. And it's my honor to introduce the moderator, Professor Bret Birdsong from the UNLV Boyd School of Law. And Professor Birdsong has done a lot of work helping us get ready for this panel. So I just want to give him some appreciation and a round of applause. Thank you, Professor Birdsong, and welcome.
Thank you, Chris, for inviting me. And, I will, a shout out to David and Charles Wilkinson and Getchies and Wilkinson, who obviously were such important voices in this field. And so glad to be here at the Center for the Marts Symposium. I suspect that I'm a lot like most folks in the room when it comes to the topics of public land and affordable housing, especially in the sense that I know a lot more about public land and public land law than I do about affordable housing. And so when asked to moderate this panel, of course, I've lived in the West for 25 years in Las Vegas. I've seen the housing markets mostly rise, but also crash for a number of years. And I've experienced life in the Sun Belt in a high economic growth decade or several decades, and seen the difficulties of many people I know finding attainable housing, much less affordable housing for folks who are low-wage workers or not workers at all. And so I appreciate that it's a very, very significant problem. I don't know that much about how affordable housing issues are solved, and so I'm very fortunate that we have truly expert panels and panelists for that area. I did do a little bit of digging around just for a few minutes in preparation of this panel. I discovered last week that the Philadelphia Federal Reserve Bank has a housing prices research project, and it was written about in the Washington Post last week, and so I was able to click through to some of the data. They've tracked housing prices longitudinally, going back to at least 1948, and for some municipalities or metropolitan areas longer than that, and tracked 30 major metropolitan areas and a national index over time on housing prices. So I looked and I saw among those 30 cities were 3 cities in the West, in the Intermountain West: Phoenix, Salt Lake City, and Las Vegas. And I thought, well, here we are. If we're looking at 50 years of retention, let's just look at the period starting in 1976, when we adopted FLIPMA as national policy to retain public lands in the national interest, and see what has been the relationship relative to at least the national average of the housing index for each of those cities. And unfortunately, the data only goes forward to 2006, so we're already 20 years old, and there might have been some things happening in the last 20 years that didn't happen from 1976 to 2006. But what I found was just in a cursory look, again, somewhat interesting. What I found is that actually in the West, for both rental housing and for housing sales, the indices, the inflation-adjusted indices for these Western cities was about equal to or less than the National Housing Index, which is to say that particularly for sales prices of houses, there was quite a significant increase from 1976 to 2006 in the inflation-adjusted price of houses. But two of the cities were below the national average. And similarly, for the rental index, actually, the rental index was mostly flat, slightly up for the national index, but for the Western cities, two of them were essentially flat and below the national average. And so one of the things that I draw from this is, first of all, there might be a lot that's happened in the last 20 years that changes that picture overall. But one of the things I'm trying to sort through in my mind is the relationship between the predominance of public lands in the West and the housing issues, particularly affordable housing. And what I draw from my look into it so far is sort of like if I was doing a Facebook relationship status for this topic, I would have to say it's complicated. So it's true that we have a predominance of public land around our cities in the West. Whether or not that is an input or how much of an input that is to either the increase in housing costs or to the solution for an increase in housing costs, I think is a really complicated question. And we're so fortunate to have this panel of experts today to help us sort out these questions. And so here's what we're going to do. The order of operations here, order of show. We're going to start off with Arthur Gailes from the American Enterprise Institute, who has worked with a number of other researchers on some very interesting work looking at sort of macro questions about these relationships and suggesting that, that the public lands can be a significant asset in addressing affordable housing and housing affordability generally throughout the West. Arthur will look forward to that. We're going to turn next then to Dan Gibbs, who currently works as executive director for the Colorado Department of Natural Resources. However, in a former life, actually in the same life, in a former professional manifestation, he was a Summit County commissioner here in the West Slope of Colorado and dealt personally with some very complex issues trying to use federal lands to construct affordable housing. We'll turn next to Eric Novak, who is a consultant at Praxis Consulting in Reno, Nevada. He has deep experience working under a law in Nevada called SNPLMA, Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act, which has a specific provision allowing the transfer of federal lands, certain federal lands, for affordable housing, and he'll help us understand the complexity of the use of that tool. And then finally, we will look with Rudy Soto, who is the director of the National American Indian Housing Council, at some particular issues and a particular perspective on these affordable housing questions, because as we know, we are all on the ancestral lands of Native Americans. Native Americans have at least federally recognized tribes have sovereignty, and the solutions available for affordable housing crises for indigenous people expand beyond perhaps just the idea of privatizing federal land. So to delve into these questions, let's turn right on to Arthur. And I'll remind everyone that we've got the Slido question submission process. So if you look in your program, there's a QR code. If you haven't accessed it already, please do that and submit your questions there. Thank you. Arthur.
Thanks, Bret, and thank you, all of you, for your time. The issue of housing on public lands has been something of a labor of love for me over the past year. And really, just by being here, you've all accomplished something that's incredibly important, which is you've spared my wife from hearing about housing for 24 hours. So she thanks you in advance. I want to talk a little bit about what we call naturally affordable housing. Bret mentioned earlier affordable housing as talking about people who are kind of in the lowest income bracket, and that is the most important aspect of affordable housing. But I also want to take a broader view of what makes housing affordable for the country and the cities within the country writ large, and for most people who are kind of just struggling to make a living. I'm going to start by setting the scene nationally a little bit here, and then we're going to progressively zoom into public lands broadly, and then specific areas where public lands have been used to build housing that is more or less affordable. We've done a survey at AI of some of the top reports of the nation's housing shortage. And those reports range from 4 to 8 million homes. We've picked a midpoint there of about 6 million homes nationally. And that is not distributed equally. The housing shortage in Oklahoma is not the same as the housing shortage in Denver, in Los Angeles, in Grand Junction. And it's particularly acute in the west of the United States. Bret alluded to earlier, this is obviously where the federal government owns most of its land. And in particular, when we talk about that land, as we'll get to in a second, we're talking about land that is managed by the Bureau of Land Management. But importantly for the conversation about affordable housing, the U.S. housing shortage is definitionally a shortage of affordable housing. And what that means is that if you're really rich, you are not experiencing a housing shortage right now. If you're making $1 million a year, there's no shortage of homes affordable for you to buy. The shortage in housing has caused a rise in the price of homes that has been most acute for the bottom quartile of homes. That is to say, people who are making roughly 120% of whatever your area's median income is and below that. So getting to the issue of how public lands can figure into the solution to the nation's supply shortage. I want to go over a policy proposal that we've put forward at the AEI Housing Center called Homesteading 2.0. And that's a policy proposal to build 3 million homes on public lands over the next 40 years. We do that in 2 ways, which I'll get into, but I'll note here that this requires 0.1% of the total federal holdings of public lands. In the scope of federal public lands, it's a minuscule amount. Sometimes we'll hear from slippery slope folks, and I'll just note here that the pace at which we're talking about disposing of federal lands could go on for another 40,000 years, and we'd still be left with all of our national monuments. We're talking about a very small proportion of what the federal government owns here. And we're talking specifically about land managed by the Bureau of Land Management. When we talk about adding 3 million new homes, we're talking about 2 precise initiatives. The first, which I'll spend most of the time talking about here, is called Home Sweet Starter Home. And that's an initiative to build starter homes for families on smaller lots in areas that are ripe for development today, should the land be freed up for use. The second initiative is called Freedom Cities, which is more of a long-range proposal. I won't get too much into it in this presentation, but it's the idea of building entirely new cities from the ground up in public lands. Altogether, this would take 850 square miles of public lands, which the federal government owns roughly 1 million square miles of federal public lands. So again, less than 1/1000th of the total holdings. This is concentrated in I have to add the disclaimer as always. This proposal does not include, outright excludes, national parks, national monuments, Indian reservation lands, conservation areas, wilderness study areas, and about 20 other federally protected land use categories. We have factored in the developability of the land, excluding mountains, and we have considered things like access to water. We have excluded official recreation areas and so forth. So when we narrow this down, One reason it's 0.1% of federal land is that we only need that much. But the other reason is just that most federally owned land just isn't suitable for housing. 99% of it isn't. You wouldn't want to build on for a number of reasons. But these two proposals take place in Nevada, Utah, Idaho, Wyoming, California, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, and Montana, which are all among the states in the nation that have experienced the fastest rising home prices over the past decade. This is particularly true when you look at this with respect to incomes, which gets back to the need for more affordable housing than the states and cities in these areas are currently providing. And we'll talk in a little bit about how we can make the homes that would be built on this land more affordable than the typical housing stock that's present in these communities now, which, as I mentioned, has gotten very expensive. As an aside, at the AI Housing Center, we've mapped out the local housing supply solutions to make both more homes and subsequently more affordable homes for essentially every city in the United States. Of those solutions, public lands is the smallest. We're talking about 9% of the overall solution to the housing supply crisis, which, if enacted in full across the country, would add about 1.6 million homes per year. Those solutions really come down, all of them, to one fundamental idea, which is smaller lots, smaller lots, smaller lots. That's particularly true in the single-family housing market, where in most cities across the nation, we have effectively made naturally affordable housing illegal or impossible to build. But it's also true in the multifamily apartment market, where apartment buildings, either low-rise or high-rise, are also effectively illegal to build in most of the United States. One more point on that is that though public lands is a relatively small proportion of that solution, and we could in fact solve the nation's supply crisis without using public lands, it is a disproportionately large part of the solution in the west of the United States, both because that's where the opportunity is, but also because there are many areas where federal land is acting as an effective growth boundary and creating pressure on housing markets. I'm going to skip this slide and go right into home, sweet starter home, and how we've mapped out the opportunity for housing. So when we do this, we take a look at all of the BLM parcels, which are about 40 acres on average, and we isolate the ones that are immediately adjacent to housing that exists now. And we do that for two reasons. One, because it helps us establish that there's demand to live in these areas. You can't just build a house in the middle of nowhere that happens to be owned by the federal government and expect people to move there en masse. You have to build to where people want to live. And the surest way we know to ascertain where people want to live is to look at where they're already choosing to live. So we map out, again, for home, sweet starter home, it's about 250 square miles of public land. And we map out the homes that are, or the BLM parcels that are immediately adjacent to housing and no more than 5 miles away from any given home. On median, they're about 0.8 miles away from homes that exist now. So these are not in the middle of nowhere. They're right next to existing communities. And the final thing that allows us to do is ascertain that there is water, sewer, infrastructure right next to where these parcels exist, so that the infrastructure costs are not massive if you're expanding outwards. This is a individual kind of location of where those BLM parcels lie and what they look at. Here we're in Las Vegas, and you can see that on the right and on the top, they've built housing at pretty high densities, actually. Las Vegas is one of the denser cities and metros in the country. And they've built all the way around the federally owned BLM parcel that's in purple here as much as they can. And they're stopped immediately because of the existence of the federal land, making it illegal to go any farther. This is one of the many areas in the Las Vegas metro where, again, BLM land acts effectively as a growth boundary. And there's not a lot there. Frankly, it's not subject to any grazing rights, mining rights, rights of way, anything like that. It's not a conservation area. Effectively, nobody's using it except I think we clocked about 2 people a day who sometimes walk from the homes and take strolls along the trail. But effectively, this is unused land, which we've selected deliberately because A, that land is sited, again, where it's most valuable for people to live in, but B, because it's the least valuable land among the corpus of federal land for what public land advocates place value on. So that's a little bit on how and where we might build housing, but that leaves aside the question of how to make that housing affordable. And as I said earlier, that really just boils down to legalizing smaller lots wherever you build housing. And the good news here is that's no different on public lands than it is anywhere else. To be technical, the rise in home prices over the past 12 years is a bit of a misnomer. House prices have not gone up at all because structures, buildings depreciate over time. The houses in the United States have gotten less valuable. The median home in the United States was built in 1981. Those homes have gotten less valuable. It's land prices that have gone up. And when you allow people to build on smaller lots, you allow them to share that among more households, more people, more families, and you drive down the cost, the very thing that is making homes more expensive to buy. Bret's given me a bit of a warning, so I'm gonna speed up a little bit. We zoomed in to look at SNPLMA specifically, which Bret mentioned earlier, which allows for the disposal of public lands in Nevada. This was enacted in 1998, and with thanks to the BLM, we traced essentially every property that's been built on the land disposed by the federal government to see what happened when you actually sold public land for housing. Was it affordable? How well did they do? How many homes got built? 90,000 homes have been built on SNPLMA land over the past 25 years, roughly since 2000, because that's when they actually started being placed on the market. That represents roughly 30% of total new housing construction in the Las Vegas metro over that time. So a significant lift in terms of the homes that got built, and frankly, much less of a lift than we would have gotten if the process for disposing of that land were happening a bit more efficiently. They still hold about half of the original land cited for SNPLMA. And we tracked home prices, and we find the exact same pattern in SNPLMA lands, homes built on previously public land, as there is everywhere in the country. Where they allowed people to build smaller homes, they got more affordable housing. When they did not, they got much less affordable housing. You can see here that the least dense homes, the largest lot homes, McMansions we'll talk about in a second, those go for $800,000. You go down to townhomes, and that cuts the price in half. And it makes those homes affordable for roughly 30% of the metro's population, where the least dense homes are only available for roughly 3% of the population. So about 10 times as many people can afford housing when you lower the density of those homes. We did a case study on a very specific development where they made a zoning decision in the beginning on the size of the lots of the homes, where you could see in blue, they allowed townhomes. In red, they allowed only McMansions to be built. And the townhomes came out at 1/3 of the price of the McMansions, despite the fact that they are in what is effectively the exact same land. The land cost is exactly the same. The only thing that changed is that they legalized small lots in one area and didn't allow it in another. And we can see an example of these homes. I just took this off Zillow yesterday, where one of these townhomes, these are built at the same time, one of these townhomes is on sale now for $370,000, give or take. And the other McMansion in the red is available for $1.1 million. That second home, the McMansion, is available for 3% of Las Vegas households, the townhome available for 26. So roughly 9 times as affordable for 9 times as many families, and you got more than double the amount of homes in the exact same amount of land. So that matters because the 2 ways to make homes affordable are to build new on smaller lots and to build a lot more housing so that current homes become more affordable for the rest of the population who's not in the new construction housing market. Let's see. And then one final point I'll make on this. One of the questions I get about selling public lands for housing a lot is, well, won't they just sell it to rich people and build mansions on that land? And then how will that make housing more affordable? And that's why the key is that these jurisdictions legalize land on smaller lots. You can see, I mentioned earlier, this townhome costs 1/3 the price of the McMansion. but the McMansion is 4 times the size and lot of the townhome. And so what that means if you're a developer is that if you were to build on the McMansion lot 4 townhomes, you would make an extra $200,000. We've done over a dozen case studies of this around the country, 2 in Denver, actually, 1 in Cherry Creek, examining what happens when you legalize townhomes on land where previously you only allow large lot single-family homes. And universally, the townhomes and the 4 families in this case who can buy 4 townhomes outbid the 1 family who can buy a McMansion. And that's just because there are so many more people who are starving for naturally affordable housing than there are people who can actually afford to buy a McMansion new. Bret has given me a large sign that says wrap up, so I'll zoom through the rest of this. I would go over briefly the reason we talk about single-family homes in a lot of this, which includes townhomes. And the reason for that is that single-family homes have become under-discussed in the public discourse around building homes, which often focuses on high-rise apartments. And single-family homes are really the only homes that are consistently large enough to be ideal for families, and that's part of what we focus on, is making sure that young, working, low-income families can actually afford to live in, rent, and buy homes. Single-family homes have an average of 3 bedrooms compared to large apartment buildings having an average of 1.3 bedrooms, which means that effectively, if you want to make sure that there are homes that are affordable, that are available for families to live in, you have to be building a majority of your homes in the single-family market. That doesn't mean large apartment buildings are a bad thing, but it does mean that we do want to make sure we're focusing on building enough single-family homes so that larger households can actually move in and live there. And then finally, single-family homes are nationally the largest provider of housing for people who make $40,000 a year or less, both in the home ownership market and in the rental market. And the reason for that is pretty simple. People are really desperate to live in single-family homes, and they will group together. They'll live in dual-income households. They'll live with their parents, their children, their wives, their brothers and sisters, and they will fight really hard to live in these homes. And one thing that we have to make sure we do is build enough home for low-income and young families. That's just a chart of the price per bedroom, showing that it's much more expensive per bedroom in large multifamily homes than in single-family detached homes. Again, getting to the point of affordability. It's not just the list price, it's the list price of the homes that you're in the market for. Finally, same thing, prices go down with smaller lots. And I'll close just noting the final reason we talk about building new homes is that nationally, the largest predictor of homelessness that we could find across metros was the willingness of cities, counties, and states to build more new single-family housing. The cities and states that have failed to build this housing have seen the highest rise in homelessness, bar none. And the cities that have managed to build housing have kept people off the street, led by Houston and Dallas, mostly the Texas cities. And the reason for this is because single-family homes provide a cushion between your apartment for rent and the street for a lot of people, because they can rely on their soft networks, their families, their friends, their communities, so that if something does happen to them, there's a landing place for those areas. The places where everybody is living in a 1-bedroom can't have their cousin come and stay in their house for a month. They can't have grandma come and live in the backyard ADU or stay in the basement. Those people get shoveled out into the streets in disproportionate numbers. And the largest predictor of that is the rise in housing prices, particularly in the single market, that is driven by a failure to build single-family homes, which is why that's important and why it's important to consider public lands as a key solution to that housing crisis.
Thank you, Arthur.
Nice job.
Thank you.
Okay, great. I'll push this up a little bit. Great. Thanks so much. Really, it's a great honor to be here at the Getchus Wilkinson Center. I was invited. I want to say I was maybe 3 weeks or so on the job of when I first became the DNR director. and it was awesome to join you all. And I was kind of talking about what my plans were for the Department of Natural Resources, and I would love to see a video of that, because I'm a few years in and the landscape has changed, and it'd be kind of fun to look back. But it is a great opportunity to be here. David Gibbs and Charles Wilkinson were obviously giants in natural resources. It's so great to see Ann here. I've gotten to know you, Ann. And Chris Winter, thank you so much for your leadership. It's been really wonderful to collaborate and brainstorm and really figure out the nexus of Gailes Wilkinson Center and the state of Colorado and the Department of Natural Resources. And there's a lot that we've done, but there's a lot more that we can do too. And I'm so grateful I got here earlier too to hear Sarah speak. And that was awesome, Sarah. Great to work with you right now too. And then Catherine, that went over the polling, everything that she spoke about, I'm kind of neck deep in. So I was glad I got here early enough to hear all that. So at the Department of Natural Resources, we have 6 main divisions. We work on everything that deals with land, water, wildlife, minerals, and oil and gas. We're a pretty diverse organization, one of the larger in state governments. And many of you know that Colorado, of course, is a state that has a lot of federal lands. And so the Department of Natural Resources, we really work hard to try to respect ownership boundaries, but also figure out how we can all work together. So I personally work really closely with the Bureau of Land Management leadership, the U.S. Forest Service, the Bureau of Reclamation on a lot of Colorado River issues going on, and now the National Park Service. And I want to be clear that Governor Polis and myself vocally have opposed many of the large-scale public land sale proposals that we've seen before Congress, in particular the ones that were trying to be sold off to offset the tax breaks for larger corporations. I believe our public lands are really set aside for every American so that they have the opportunity to enjoy those really special open spaces that make Colorado so unique, and really the American West just such an amazing, desirable place to live. But at the same time, I also believe that there should be a process available today to really look at maps and be very strategic and surgically look at some of these lands that could benefit housing. And I'm going to share with you a few examples when put on my old hat when I was a Summit County Commissioner that I have personal knowledge on. And I know many of you are from Colorado, but Summit County is just, about 2 hours west of here. We're only about 31,000 people in the whole county. But I want to share with you that as we work on public lands, but also housing issues, that it's not really a simple soundbite, but it's much more complicated and complex. I want to say, Professor Birdsong, you said that earlier. And I want to share with you some of the experiences that I have. This is our mission and vision of the DNR. Summit County is, a lot of people are aware of the ski resorts up there. We have Breckenridge, we have Keystone, Copper Mountain, A Basin. Tourism is a big part of our local economy, brings visitors, jobs, a lot of second homeowners too. I lived in this community for 23 years now, and I've lived in places where I've never ever saw my neighbor because they live either overseas or just, not in Colorado. The core of our community, we have our teachers, our service workers, business people, folks that work in the outdoor industry. And many people kind of came initially for the outdoors, but want to live there to help build families and businesses. The community I live in is over 80% U.S. Forest Service land. We have 14ers, we have wilderness areas, we have mostly a healthy forest with lodgepole pine. We have a bark beetle epidemic that we're still dealing with. But many of our communities, there's houses and then there's Forest Service land right there. So either the communities have kind of built around U.S. Forest Service lands and kind of slowly have been developed right up next to U.S. Forest Service land. So the issue of housing and the need for more workforce housing has definitely been a topic that's been really relevant for many years. Catherine, that shared some of the polling, her business partner is Lori Weigel, and we used to contract with her when I was a Summit County Commissioner to do polling every few years to figure out, hey, what are the top issues facing our community? And guess what? Housing always ranked like lightning ahead of everything else. It was just a huge, huge topic. And most people wanted to live in a community where they can live and work. And so, you know, we're a pretty small community. I mentioned earlier, we're 31,000 people, but we also have 31,000 homes. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? And so we, you know, as a former elected official, you know, we want to be responsive to what those community needs told us to focus on. So we worked on a couple different local ballot questions. Those all passed. It would be provide more money to have us focus on trying to develop workforce housing. We did housing assessments of both like private, county. We looked at federal lands as well for potential housing opportunities. The search really helped us identify 2 specific parcels that were U.S. Forest Service land within Summit County. The first parcel was called the Lake Hill property, which is right by Frisco, more or less sandwiched between I-70 and the Dillon Dam Road. The second parcel was in the town of Dillon. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. This Lake Hill property is about 44 acres. You can see on this map, you're sandwiched between I-70 and the Dillon Dam Road. For folks that are really familiar with this particular area, if you're in Frisco heading on eastbound I-70 towards Dillon and Silverthorne, you know, that overlook area to the right where people take photos and so forth, you more or less pull off to that lower area, and it's right there, right below, 44 acres below and to the right. So when you think about it, it's like most amazing area for potentially to live because you have these extraordinary views of Peak 1 and so forth in the lake, but also you're sandwiched in between some really busy areas within the community. So we did a lot of community work to figure out like, hey, does the community really want us to work on this? It was very clear that they did. We then worked with Congressman Jared Polis, who's now our governor, and former U.S. Senator Mark Udall to work on a bill. And what we did was we amended the Forest Service or the Facilities Realignment Act. And that allowed, we got that actually through Congress, and President Obama signed it, but that allowed a direct sale to Summit County government for the fair market value of that particular property. You know, the stars were aligned with this. You know, we had the conservation community very supportive of this at the time. We had, like, there was really no opposition at all. This is very targeted of this particular location. We knew we needed housing. We did analysis that reflected that we could develop up to 400 units on that site. However, more complications kind of came forward, and the infrastructure costs alone to build was immense. Just to update a wastewater facility to tie in with the town of Frisco, that had a price tag of $30 million, so not cheap at all. So right now, the project is not moving forward. The county's working really hard to try to figure out all the different funding that would need to occur to really make this work and happen. But in the future, there will be likely 400 units at this site. Another location we worked on, and again, we really had this like really great localized support, and actually the mechanics of it occurred after I had left being a county commissioner. But there's a particular site in the town of Dillon, a little over 10 acres, U.S. Forest Service land. Forest Service was really eager to partner with us on this particular land. It was used for, they had some housing there for some of their employees, but the buildings were literally falling apart. And so they wanted to partner with us and use the new authority under the Farm Bill of 2018 that allowed the U.S. Forest Service to lease land. And the plan for the county then was to develop 162 rental items there too. So that was really positive. However, the funding for that kind of fell apart in part because there was only a 50-year lease and the county really needed to have a longer term lease for that. But it's doable. The next I want to share with you just a quick snapshot is State Land Board. So that's one of my divisions in the Department of Natural Resources. We actually manage 2.8 million acres for the benefit of K through 12 education. The governor is really interested in trying to figure out housing for teachers. So when you look at these lands, we really have great opportunities. So we did an assessment. I know these aren't federal lands, but these are public lands. An assessment of these kind of checkerboard areas on this map of what areas around the state would be possible for workforce housing on these lands. The one I just want to share with you briefly, and I know I only have a minute left, is a property in Avon, Colorado, right outside of Vail. This is an area that we've been working, where Department of Transportation has housed numerous, they only had actually maybe like 8 housing units there. And so we moved them to another location, and the plan is to develop potentially up to 700 units in a phased approach just outside of Vail. And so this would be a partnership for U.S. Forest Service employees, CDOT employees, potentially Department of Natural Resources employees, all coming together to make this happen on these particular lands. So a few takeaways, as we look at, housing on different lands, the infrastructure needs are challenging and they're very expensive. We really need a balance where these are at. When I describe these locations on the map, these are not backcountry areas. These are very targeted, really close to all the major, bus lines, public transportation. For the most cases, have water infrastructure and so forth too, where there's all the localized buy-in. Everyone says, "Hey, we need to do more," and these are the great locations. So that's my presentation. We've learned a lot with some of these housing concepts at the Department of Natural Resources with State Land Board. We're going to continue to really work more to figure out where we can do more housing for folks that are most in need throughout the state of Colorado on these lands. Thanks.
So I'll give you a 5-minute warning.
Okay. Okay.
I wanted to stress housing everywhere, but very certain locations. Yeah, that's I think the same for us. Infrastructure needs exist. Can't afford to make it
And
work.
to advance, just use the arrows.
Yep, just use the arrows.
Arrows, okay. My name is Eric Novak. I'm president of Praxis Consulting. We're development finance consultants based in Reno. We work in the West with a lot of nonprofit organizations, housing authorities, and for-profit developers. I want to first acknowledge Ron Mobley, who was originally intended to provide this presentation from the Bureau of Land Management, Special Legislative Program Manager there. And I'll be describing the Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act, Section 7B, which is specifically a provision in that law that allows for land to be disposed of for affordable housing. Praxis has taken part in 3 transactions so far using this law, and we're working on another one right now. I'm going to introduce the law. I'll walk through a couple of case studies of projects that were financed using SNPLA 7B, and then I hope we can and talk about the benefits and drawbacks of the program, but I hope we could also talk about its applicability in the West for other states. So this is Section 7B. It's one paragraph in the law, and that was passed in 1998. Briefly, the Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act authorizes the Secretary of the Interior, in consultation with the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, to dispose of BLM land administered in the state of Nevada for less than fair market value for affordable housing purposes to state or local governments, including public housing authorities. And affordable is defined as by the Section 104 of the Cranston-Gonzalez National Affordable Housing Act, what we in the affordable housing community know as the law that created the HUD home program. And generally it's housing that serves households below 80% of AMI. It took 8 years for BLM and HUD to come up with the guidance on how this program would work. And then that guidance was updated again in 2022 to correct some of the problems with the original guidance. And so a lot of it was interpreting that paragraph and what we could and could not do within it. Local governments have also reserved over 500 acres of land in Southern Nevada. So most of it's in unincorporated Clark County, but also Las Vegas, Henderson, North Las Vegas for these purposes. So I was going to walk through the provisions, I'm sorry. The important provisions are, has to be nominated through a state or local government or housing authority, that HUD reviews the nomination for concurrence. The sales price is a de minimis price of less of $100 an acre. The property has to serve households below 80% of area median income. It can be for sale or rental housing. At least 80% of the land has to be used for affordable housing purposes, so you could have 20% of the land for higher income populations or for commercial development and so on. That there's a reversion clause that if you don't complete your project and have a C of O within 5 years, that it reverts back to the federal government. And so it's really important that you develop projects that can be completed in that time frame. And then a lot of the details of affordability and other compliance are really overseen by the local governments, and it's through a disposition development agreement. And so the local governments play a very important role in identifying sites and in deciding what's going to be done on those sites. The new guidance was meant to speed up the process that previously had taken 3 to 4 years to complete one disposition. We're hoping that that'll take less a year now for that. So the process, briefly, a nomination application is submitted by a local government. The application looks like a development proposal, so it have number of units, income targeting, ownership of rental housing, there'd be site plan, floor plans, et cetera. That's then sent to HUD for their concurrence that yes, this is a bona fide affordable housing project and the jurisdiction is in compliance with HUD programs. It's then sent to the Bureau of Land Management, and they follow their lengthy process for disposing of public land, and which is includes environmental review and appraisal. Sometimes they have to do their own survey. Then they draft what's called a notice of realty action, which has to be published in the Federal Register. So every disposition is published in the Federal Register, and that's a lengthy process. And so, as I said, the hope is to get that down to 1 year. And it's, but it is, we, particularly with the cuts in staff at HUD and BLM and, government shutdown right now, a lot of uncertainty of what the future will look like for this program. So far, there have been 6 dispositions, 50 acres of land, and that have created 1,058 units, 210 for sale units that are in development now, 848 rental units. So I want to give you 2 examples of projects that have used Section 7B for development. The first one is Heirloom at Pebble, and Praxis worked on that. We were the finance consultant. So that is a 192-unit new construction affordable senior rental project. It is on 5 acres of land in Clark County. It opened this year. As with all the 7B nominations, it's actually on an urban infill site. So a lot of Clark County looks like Swiss cheese. A lot of the BLM parcels are next to residential development. And so this in turn is actually an amazing site because it's in a high income neighborhood near schools, public transit, et cetera, et cetera. So these are sites that are very hard to find in Clark County. That land is land that's zoned and that's affordable, are very difficult for developers to find. This one, so Heirloom targets senior households below 60, 50, and 30% of median income. So 30% of median income is equivalent to a rent of $574 a month for a one-bedroom unit and $642 a month for a two-bedroom unit. And a 60% of AMI would be $1,047 for one bedroom and $1,285 for a two bedroom. So these are rents that are $500, $600 a month below market rents right now in the Las Vegas Valley. The project was completed this year, but under the old guidance, and it took us 3 years to go through that nomination process. And there were sort of interesting things like no one knew at HUD who was supposed to sign the concurrence, and that HUD would only provide a no objection letter, and BLM wanted a letter of approval. And that went on for 6 months in Washington. And so part of the new guidance was fixing things like that are just stupidity that we just wanted to get through this disposition process. Heirloom at Pebble is financed using tax-exempt bonds and low-income housing tax credits. That's the way that most multifamily rental housing is built in this country. And free land is one tool in assembling the financing, but free land alone doesn't create affordable housing. So it's less than, in this case, it was, the appraised value of the land was $4.5 million, but the project cost $47.9 million to build. So it was less than 10% of the total development cost would have been land. And so on top of that, we are layering all sorts of financing to make affordable housing happen. And so this site happens to be located in what is called a difficult development area. Under HUD rules, we get a 30% boost in our tax credits. Most of the BLM land is in these small area difficult development areas. And they happen to be in higher income zip codes. And so that boost alone is worth as much as the land. On top of that, we have lots of tools at the state and local level. We have a property tax exemption for affordable housing in Nevada. We have fee reductions within Clark County and density bonuses and parking reductions. And on top of that, this project had $12.3 million of soft subordinate debt. So this is subsidy on top of all those other financing tools we talked about. This is an example of a home ownership project that's in development now. Clark County had taken the lead on this. They identified the site, wrote the nomination application, actually zoned the land ahead of time. And what's nice about that is that these are sites that are on the edge of development. And so if you zone them now, before the housing comes, you're not gonna have NIMBY problems. It's much easier to get the higher densities that we would want to see for these projects. So Cactus Trails entails the new construction of 210 single-family homes on 20 acres. Clark County created a community land trust to maintain affordability over time. The project targets households below 80 and below 100% of area median income. And so for a family of four, that's households earning from $76,160 to $95,200. And so it's very, very hard to create affordability at that level in home ownership. And Clark County put in a lot of its own subsidy to make that affordable. But they also went through the process of procuring a developer and sort of managing that process of the disposition development agreement. So it was the role of the local government there was really important. So the strengths of the program, it's free land, can't turn that down. And as I said, it's only, on a multifamily rental project, that might be 10% of the development cost. But it's still one of the tools we'd use to assemble the financing for affordable housing. These are great sites. They're, These are difficult to identify sites, and they tend to be in higher income areas. A lot of affordable housing gets clustered in the downtown, and this allows more choice in housing for tenants. All the parcels have been in those difficult development areas. We get a boost in tax credits. And Clark County, as I said, has been taking a leadership role in sort of creating a program that can be replicated over and over again. And we hope to see now with the new guidance, this program being used more. I know there's 4 nomination applications going through right now in addition to the 6 I already talked about. And, and that new guidance, as I said, really is streamlining that process. The downsides, as I said, is it still takes time, and the BLM process is still very frustrating, and that a lot of this is, I think, disposition rules under the federal lands policy, Public Lands Management Act, FLPMA, that we have to follow in order to dispose of land. The reversion language, if you go to a bank for financing and you tell them that, well, yeah, the BLM could take this back if we don't finish in 5 years, they get very nervous about that. And so you try and only bite off as much as you can chew at one time. So the scale of projects has to be relatively small because it has to be something we can complete very comfortably within 5 years and have a certificate of occupancy. Some of the sites still have infrastructure needs. A lot of Nevada is this patchwork of roads, and so you'll see half a road paved. The other half is waiting for a developer to come in and build the next site, and they pave that other half of the road. But even if it's an urban island, there's still infrastructure costs with that. And the last one is, this is applicable to the whole state of Nevada, but we haven't seen it used anywhere else in the state yet. And I'm not sure if that's because those urban islands in Clark County make it much easier there, or if it's the reservation. There was a very clear reservation process for Southern Nevada, but it's not clear in the rest of the state how you nominate parcels for disposition. Yeah, thanks.
Great.
Okay.
Rudy, first warning, I'll give this 5 minutes.
Sure.
You're good.
Good.
Guys are all right on time. It's
Okay.
city.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here with you. My name is Rudy Soto. I'm a member of the Shoshone-Bannock Tribes of Idaho. I want to start off just by thanking Chris Winter, the Getchus Wilkinson Center, for having us represented here. I serve as the Executive Director for the National American Indian Housing Council. Also just want to mention and acknowledge the presence of John Echohawk, founder of the Native American Rights Fund, who's here. I had the privilege and pleasure as a young student of going to a conference that featured Charles Wilkinson and John Echohawk and other powerful Native American, Alaskan Native, and Native Hawaiian leaders many years ago, and it helped cement in me a drive to be in public service and to be in the career that has involved me working for the National Indian Child Welfare Association, the National Council of Urban Indian Health as a congressional staffer, and much more because of being in the presence of leaders like you. And I just want to acknowledge that much of the work that had been done in those decades past has paved the way for organizations like mine that's been around since 1974, the National American Indian Housing Council, and really set on fire this movement of self-determination in Indian country, and that's a big pillar of the work that we do. And so for us, being here, being a part of that this conversation is meaningful and vital, and that's really central to the conversation today on making available federal lands for housing. This is not something that we want to be left out of. It's not something that we are coming at as Indian country and tribal housing. We represent tribally designated housing entities across the country, including in Alaska and Hawaii. And this is something that many, I think, have a lot of reasons to be skeptical about. But if there were and are to be actions in this realm, we want to be at the table. Meaningful consultation, early, upfront, every step of the way. Just in jumping back a little bit, sharing about our organization. So we support tribes and tribally designated housing entities, TDHEs as we call them, by providing training, technical assistance, and advocacy to ensure access to safe, decent, and affordable housing. As many are aware, if there's a community that's been impacted by shortages or substandard housing, it's tribal communities. We're really highly overrepresented in the numbers of people that are homeless across the country, and I'm sure that's true here in Colorado. So when it comes to being a part of identifying solutions where communities, people's populations, citizens that really deserve housing, we see ourselves as being at the forefront of that. And also I should say that for us, it's not about Indian housing being a handout, as some people may sometimes see tribal housing programs. Our ancestors had the foresight while the country was being formed to form legal agreements and treaties that are protected and upheld by federal law, the Supreme Court, the Congress, through today. And housing, healthcare, and education has always been among those key tenets. And so that's why there have been, throughout the country's history and to today, funding programs for housing. And in the 90s, in 1996, there was what was called the Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act, NAHASDA, which is the bedrock foundation that funds tribal housing authorities across the country, which we are a part of that law in terms of being a subcontractor to administer the training and TA, and we're the main leader and voice and advocate for TDHEs across the country. We've passed a resolution on the HUD and DOI joint task force that came out announcing their intention to assess making federal lands available for affordable housing. And our resolution calls for formal consultation with tribal governments to ensure the protection of tribal lands and calling for tribes to receive the same opportunities for housing development as state and local governments, parity. Essentially, there are many times where tribes, tribal communities are left out of the conversation, whether that be intentionally or unintentionally, or because we have different land status. In some places, many places, it's trust land or restricted fee lands, and people can sometimes see these things as too complicated or complex and unwilling to try to understand that, to make it to where we're included. So for us, making sure, again, that we're at the table, that there's meaningful consultation, and that it's grounded in an understanding that tribal nations are sovereign governments and that we're not stakeholder groups or to be treated as such. And that our housing needs are focused on self-determination, that we're not looking at if we were to get lands conveyed back to us, that they wouldn't be lands that are unusable, like so much of the past where, the places where tribes are located, there's an intention behind places where there's, less access to natural resources. And we have a spectrum of housing needs just like everyone else. So, many of the laws that are put in place from the past authorization of NAHASDA have made it to where much of the funding and the programs are structured for low-income housing. And it's actually created a problem where you have people that are able, as tribes grow and develop like other rural and remote communities across the country, and through the emergence of tribal gaming and economic development, it's made it to where you have people that, could and would afford to buy their own home and build it, but they're not able to access private mortgage. Access to capital is a challenge. And this has to do with burdensome regulations and policies that exist at the Department of Interior under Bureau of Indian Affairs. So we're really eager to make sure that not only in the conversations about the DOI and HUD Joint Task Force, but in reauthorizing NAHASDA, that there's strong coordination that creates mechanisms for the Department of Interior and BIA to streamline their processes, not have duplicative environmental reviews, to have the staffing and the structures in place that make it to where these land titles or leases are processed in a timely manner. I can share an example of a story I just came by where there was a Zuni tribal housing authority where they told me within recent months there were tribal members that were qualified for homes using a complex set of federal government programs to make it to where they were going to be able to become first-time homeowners, but because they couldn't get the title transfers at the BIA, those family members, those community members, they ended up not being qualified anymore. When most of us go to buy a home, there's a window of time and these things move quickly. But when it takes months or years to try and move through a transaction like that, it can fall apart, and then people will never try again. And word gets around and other people feel disheartened, and it leads to discouragement. So we really need everyone's help to make sure that we're a part of the conversation as you all are here today. With that, I'll wrap up. Thank you.
I've already up here again. I think it's good. So thank you very much to our excellent panelists. I see there's quite a few questions have come in on Slido, and I'm going to make amalgams of some of them. But let me start off really with a question that maybe we'll first go to Arthur on this, but I'm interested in the comments of the other panelists as well. And it has to do with the extent to which land availability is part of the problem and therefore part of the solution to the problem. One of the questioners notes the book Abundance by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, and its recognition of many other inputs to the housing crisis in general, inputs which include, well, we've heard a little bit about the availability of infrastructure, zoning, whether it is the requirement of X number of parking spots, or whether it is zoning that deals explicitly with density. And other issues. Water availability, which Arthur, you mentioned, but which is a very significant issue. There are a number of places around the West where now there are regulations saying if you want to build something, including housing, bring water with you. That can be very challenging. We heard, of course, from Eric that even with free land, there are all these other pieces of the puzzle that have to be resolved, including the piecing together of perhaps many different other subsidies for affordable housing and able to make it pencil out. So I guess my general question is can we address those aspects? To what extent is this a solvable issue with with just the tool of land availability. And I guess for Arthur, maybe how do we prioritize among these different problems? And so let's hear from all of you on that, I guess.
Thanks. So yeah, there's a lot in that question. I'll try to go point by point on it. First, I want to deal with infrastructure because Dan brought that up too, and that's a real problem for a couple reasons. First, as you mentioned, water availability, but second, it's just expensive to build infrastructure in areas where there's currently nothing. And that's particularly a problem where there aren't stakeholders with a profit motive involved. But the fact that there aren't homes on public land is part of the solution to providing the infrastructure. New homes generate revenue for the cities, counties, and states that they live in. In the area of public land that operates through three main venues. The first is four main venues. The first is the land sales themselves, but those tend to go to the Treasury. In the case of SNPLMA, some percentage of it goes to the state of Nevada, but they're generally not available for the municipality at hand. The second is impact fees that get levied on new construction, which range nationally from somewhere between $2,000 to $20,000 for a single home. The third is in the sales taxes on construction costs. Roughly 60% of the materials that are paid for in construction costs, this is Colorado specific, but I have no reason to doubt it's true for the nation in general, go to the counties and state that the homes are sited in. The reason for that is because people go to Home Depot and buy stuff. Particularly in Colorado, Denver, where you have sales taxes, that's a generator of revenue. But then finally, by far the largest generator of revenue for these new homes is in property taxes. So we could just do a little back of the envelope math for two of the cases that we discussed. So Dan discussed the building, I believe it was 400 homes on 40 acres, was that it? Okay, 400 homes on 40 acres. His case isn't a market development, but if we assumed it was, and we took a conservative estimate and said those homes go for $400,000. That would be a generator of $1.6 million per year in property taxes. You can loan against that estimated revenue, and that goes a long way. It won't solve your problem because your fee was, I think, $30 million for the project. That's going to be too high for 400 homes. But if we go to SNPLMA, we can see how much revenue that generates in higher value land. So SNPLMA, those homes are about $500,000 per home. That means that last year, give or take, because the way Nevada taxes homes is lunacy, but he knows what I'm talking about. Give or take, it generated $240 million to the cities and counties in which SNPLMA homes were built in 2024 alone. And that accumulates over the years and decades over which those homes have been sited. That is a huge revenue generator that in part helps to pay for the infrastructure that those homes need. You asked about zoning, and then I'll turn the floor over for some of the other categories so I'm not monopolizing. But I love to talk about zoning. Zoning and broadly land use restrictions are the cause of the nation's housing supply shortage. I mentioned in my presentation that you could solve the nation's housing supply shortage without public lands at all. That is true, and you can have solved the affordability crisis without using public lands at all. They are not strictly necessary. Part of the reason that public lands are getting called into this conversation is due to the deliberate failure of cities and counties across the country to legalize naturally affordable housing across the vast majority of the United States. That is a problem that is caused by our existing communities. It's one reason we put forward Freedom Cities as an example, because perhaps with public lands, we have the potential to build new cities that don't commit the sins that our current cities have been committing for the past century in gradually restricting the availability of housing for the people who most need it.
I'll just add maybe, for me, it's not, I described, the challenges even when you do own the land, right? There's all these other components. And the $30 million, that was actually just one subcomponent of the infrastructure costs to help expand a wastewater treatment facility in Frisco. So it had nothing to do with then you have the drinking water component, you have all the infrastructure of earth moving and power lines and so forth. So the cost is just enormous. I will say, the local land use issues definitely can be an impediment, but putting on my former county commissioner hat, I will say not every community is the same. Like, you live in Washington, D.C. You're both in Washington, D.C. You're in Reno. I'm in a small mountain town of 5,000 people in Breckenridge. Like, the community character where I live is very different from what they have too. Our community would never approve anything that's like super, super high density. It has to fit within the community character. So I'm a big fan of like understanding your own community, but then not using that as a restriction though, like to look for opportunities to build, but make sure it's like within your community character that you have, I think is really important. Yeah.
There's so many challenges. Our most efficient for-profit multifamily developers in Las Vegas, first of all, they're not building market rate housing at all right now because it doesn't pencil. It just doesn't, the numbers don't work. And so they're shifting gears and building affordable housing because at least, you know, if there's subsidy, they can keep building, which is important. They have staff, they want to, but the apartment that would have cost a total all in $180,000 5-6 years ago is now costing $300,000 for the exact same product. And, you know, and a lot of the things in terms of, you know, energy code and fire safety and, you know, elevators and, you know, these are really, really efficient builders, but, you know, that's the fact. And so in order to make that affordable to households that are below, you know, 80% of median income, 60% of median income. It turns out that Nevada is, and Las Vegas in particular, has 12 units available for every household below 30% of median income. So we have the least number of, the median across the country is about 35 units. So we have this, and part of it is we got a lot less federal largesse than other states because we grew later and all of those formulas were set in the 60s and 70s. And so we have less Section 8, we have less of everything. So it's incredibly difficult to get to that very low income. I mean, what I say for our households below 60% of median income, that is our workforce housing in Las Vegas. I mean, that's the reality is. I mean, that's people working at UPS, at, you know, within the casinos and so on. And so we're building, the affordable housing is the workforce housing.
So if I might just take the moderator's prerogative to ask one more quick question. We never like to be the people between the audience and lunch, but there is a lot of interest in this, in the Slido questions about 7B of SNPLMA. It seems to me to have the virtue of being a tightly targeted toward, you know, the neediest folks in the housing community. Yet it's only really been applied in Las Vegas, and then really only maybe a handful or a couple of handfuls of times over its 25-year history. Seems like a good idea. Uptake seems a little low. My question is about exportability. So exportability both in terms of, would this be a useful tool in Indian country if tribes and tribal housing authorities were made part of this as well? So that might be something that, Rudy, you could address. And in general, would it be exportable to, say, Colorado or throughout the West as adding another good tool to the toolbox? So let's start with Rudy and then sort of branch out from there.
Yeah, I'll just say I'm going to admit that I don't understand SNPLMA enough. I'm not even sure if I'm saying the acronym
you said
correctly.
It perfectly.
To speak to that. But what I can say is that it's very interesting. There is an emergence of tribally designated housing entities, reservation-based, that are moving into the space of meeting their tribal members where they are and utilizing federal funds, NAHASDA funds, as part of the capital stacks, the financing equation to build housing in cities, in urban areas. And there have been a couple even just in this last month, one in Omaha, Nebraska of the Ponca tribe, one in Siletz, Oregon, in the capital of Oregon, in Salem, and in larger cities. It's been happening for more time. But so I'm interested to learn more.
I would just echo that too. I'd love to learn more too. And for the state of Colorado, it's definitely very multi-agency focus for housing, where you have my departments involved, you have Office of Economic Development and International Trade, and you have Department of Local Affairs, all kind of teaming up to figure out who can bring what to the table and partner with local governments to get projects off the ground.
Great.
I think it has guardrails, so I think it really requires a lot of staff time at the local level to make something like that work. And part of the problem is that Nevada's a very poor state. Our property tax base is horrible, and so it takes a lot of initiative from local governments to be able to do this, in addition to the BLM process. So I think it's one tool. We love it. We will use it as much as it's available. It's not going to solve our affordable housing problems by itself.
Well, Arthur, you had the first word. Do you want the last? I know he's going to say yes.
You're right. Thank you. We're really far behind the 8 ball and on affordability generally. And 96% of the country is operating with privately owned housing, is living in it. And ultimately, the cities, counties, states that may have affordable housing and even affordable home ownership for groups who are at median income, at 80% median income in those areas are not the cities and states that have invested most heavily in housing subsidies. They're the cities and states that have built the most homes. The most important thing that we can do if we want to make sure that housing is available is not build. I don't want to dismiss the subsidy market because it's a vital component of people who are below 80% AMI, people who are making less than 60% AMI. But a big problem in a lot of the US is that we are extending the subsidy market to people who are making 120% area median income. We are expanding it to people who are relatively middle-class workforce, and it's depriving people who are below 60% AMI of the funds and resources that they need to support. If we're not building in the middle of the housing market, then A, we're not going to get enough homes. B, we're not opening up the homes that already exist for people who can't afford new homes. And C, we're taking resources away from the people who made it most. If we want to get affordable housing on public lands, the key is to make sure we build the most housing with the least footprint available so that people aren't buying too much land, so that we're not damaging the public land trust that we've inherited from our forefathers, but at the same time, we're making meaningful improvements to the housing supply across the country.
Great. Well, join me in giving it up for our expert panels who have brought their housing expertise to us public lands nerds. So.
Hey, thanks so much. We have lunch next door.